Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the show. We're here today on episode 2218 of the Cabral Concept, and we are going to be going through a real-world case study today. So I think we have about a dozen or so of these case studies completed. We've done them on food sensitivities. We've done them for children's food sensitivities. We've done them with gut dysfunction in terms of bacterial overgrowth, yeast overgrowth. We've done omega-3 levels to omega-6 levels. We've done heavy metals. We've done quite a few. So if you're looking for additional case studies, if this is something that interests you, actually going through real-world wellness client case studies, I will definitely link those up at stephencabral.com/2218. And if you'd actually like to download this lab, it's fairly interesting, and learn more about it, I will link that up as a PDF right there as well at stephencabral.com/2218. All right, looking forward to getting into this here today. This is what we call a mold mycotoxins test. And the reason why that's important is because how we look for mycotoxins, or how we look for mold inside of the body, is essentially the waste that they give off. And we call those mycotoxins. Basically, they are toxins produced by molds. And if we find those toxins inside of your body, well, then we can deduce you've been exposed to mold. So what I want to share with you here today is that we look at multiple types of mycotoxins from multiple types of mold, how you might be exposed to it, and then, of course, what that might look like. All right, so this is actually a very simple test. This is a urine-based test. So in the morning, just one morning, you would just you'd receive a little plastic jar, and it's a sample jar, and you just fill it with about, well, it comes down to about 10 mLs of urine. It's like a tiny amount of urine that you then mail back to the lab, and you would receive a lab report like this, where you would then get on with one of the Equilife health coaches or your practitioner that you're working with, and actually look at your mold-based levels. One of the reasons why it's pretty important to do is that, and I've talked about this before through the research, that mold is one of the stealth pathogens out there. So that means that you don't really see it, but you could have mold spores in the air. 51% of all homes in the New England-based area, as well as England and other northern, more moist-based climates, definitely have mold issues. And in the homes, that was about 51% of all homes. Mold is most easily transmitted through the air, but also in water-damaged buildings. So, for example, a doctor friend of mine was at work and really started to get like a lot of sinus issues, postnasal drip, headaches, lower energy during the day. And he's not a naturopathic doctor. He's not a functional medicine doctor, but he knows about health. There's no doubt about it. And so I said, well, do you have this issue as much when you're at home? And he said, no. And I said, well, when does it start? He's like, well, about like a half hour or so after I get to work. I said, is it possible that you have mold in your air conditioning vents or your heating vents at work? Or, is it possible that you have water damage in your unit? So I asked him, I said, listen, do you have rugs in your office? And they actually, and this is strange, but it's an older hospital building, and they had rugs there. I said, well, just kind of pull up a corner, see if it looks like there's ever been any water damage or anything like that. And he didn't do it right away. It took a couple weeks, but he looked at it. He actually looked around on the ceiling, and he saw that there was previous water damage. And he just complained actually to the hospital, and I'm shocked that they did this, but they investigated and they found all mold behind the walls. So every day he was going to his office and he was breathing in mold. That is the most common exposure to mold. You're renting a home, you just bought a home, and behind the walls, behind the sheetrock, there's mold because at one point there was water damage, right? There was a water heater or a toilet or a bathtub or something that overflowed, and then that led to water then damage inside the walls, and then as it dried, it started over time to grow mold. That's the most common exposure. We see it all the time. The problem is it can lead to low mood, depression, skin rashes, low immunity. It can lead to hair loss. It can lead to, those are the main ones. Mood, skin, hair loss, headaches, brain fog. That is typically what we see. That's when we decide to investigate and run a mold-based test. We also run a mold-based test if we've done a candida metabolic and vitamins test and some of those first 9 markers are elevated, that may show mold. If that's the case, maybe we run this test, or maybe we just save the money and we do a mold-based protocol. Either way, though, this is important to look at it, because for chronic cases where people are chronically sick and unwell and tired and all that, you do want to look for stealth pathogens. I'm going to link up my stealth pathogens podcast. Obviously, it's completely free, and it will teach you about all the different stealth pathogens, not just mold. Sometimes we blame mold on everything. It's like 10 years ago, we used to blame everything on Lyme. Not everything is Lyme, not everything is mold, but it's important to look for it because some cases are Lyme, some cases are mold. All right, so let's start to look at this lab. My team has redacted this for me, which is very kind of them. And so obviously this is very confidential for the client. So this is basically a mycotox profile, and this is the metabolite. So think of this as the toxin right here, the mycotoxin. Think of this as the normal range. And then, so green would be ideal, okay? And then the red would be abnormal. And I'll talk about abnormal in just a moment. So the normal range for these 3 aflatoxins are part of Aspergillus. If you're not watching this on video, it's okay. We obviously would love you to watch right on YouTube at Stephen Cabral, or right on my website at stephencabral.com/2218. If you're just listening to this on audio, I will explain it all on audio as well, so no worries at all. So under Aspergillus, there are 3 main mycotoxins, okay? So there's basically 3 toxins that come from Aspergillus. So Aspergillus is the type of mold that we're talking about, okay? It's basically a genus of mold, a type of mold. Almost think of it as like a type of fungus. That's the best way to look at it, because it is. So Aspergillus can give off aflatoxin M1. You might have heard of aflatoxin M1 before. When we talk about aflatoxins, we sometimes talk about there being aflatoxins in things like peanut butter or sometimes coffee, things of that nature. Ochratoxin A is another one, and gliotoxin is the last. Now, this individual wellness client was perfectly fine on aflatoxin M1 and gliotoxin, no problems at all. But ochratoxin, we wanted them below a 7.5. And when we see their lab, they're about halfway into the abnormal range. They're a 13.1. So they're more than double their normal. It's not, but when I say this to you, meaning this is exactly what I would say to the wellness client as well. This is not a tragic level of mold, right? It's in the abnormal range, but it's not a tragic level of mold. Like, it's not massive mold exposure. There's mold exposure. Don't get me wrong. There's mold exposure, but this is not massive. This is certainly would affect someone with an already weakened immune system, and it would certainly affect someone with already imbalanced gut issues, etc. Okay, so it still matters, but the main sources of Aspergillus, I know I mentioned peanut butter before, but really the main sources of Aspergillus are in the ear. So it's airborne. Think of like the fall, when the leaves are falling or have fallen to the ground, there's Aspergillus in the air. Dead leaves, dead grass, dead things like that lead to mold. And especially in the spring, when the snow is melted and then the leaves are exposed, all of the grasses and leaves can have mold on them as well. So just keep that in mind. It's definitely more airborne. The next set of aflatoxins would fall under the penicillium. And these are also mainly airborne too, just to let you know. They can also be part of foods. I'm not saying they can't, they can, but they're not as common, that's all. So this is stearomycin and mycophenolic acid. Both of these are mycotoxins, as I said, of penicillium. Both of them look great. So this client had no major issues whatsoever on their lab test. So that's good to see. But we can certainly see there was some airborne exposure. We would ask them, listen, have you been exposed to mold in a house that you were living in before, renting in, or currently? And it doesn't look massive. So it doesn't seem like they would be living in a place where there's a lot of mold, or at least not spending a lot of time. Maybe like you'd be at like a parent's house that they're over maybe once a week or so, but not a massive amount for their own home as well. Or this is a previous exposure and they still have some in their system. All right. But now we start to move down to different mold-based exposures. These come from environmental exposures, still like water damaged apartments, etc., or in the air. However, these are found in a lot of, we'll call it dry good grains or beans or legumes or nuts or anything packaged that could be exposed to mold, right? It could grow over time. So these are the Stachyboitres. That's how you pronounce that, Stachyboitres. And that's Roridin and Varicarin. And when we look at this, the normal ranges for these mycotoxins are below 0.2, very, very small amounts. This client's a 5.67. Okay, now we're talking about clinical significance, right? This is significant. And then we look at the Varicarin A, which is, again, the second mycotoxin, so the second toxin being given off by this mold in this person's body. Clinical range should be less than 1.3, and this person's a 21.97, right? So we're looking at a massive increase, 20x or so of what normal should be. So this is considered then, yes, a high exposure to this particular mold. And I'll get to then what we're going to do about it in just a moment. And then the last mold that we are looking for, well, I shouldn't say the last mold, there's a couple more, is Fusarium. And this is Aniatin B, as well as Z. aralonin, and that Aniatin is actually quite high as well on this individual. Again, we're looking at this from cereal-based grains, nuts, legumes. Doesn't mean they're all bad. I just want to share with you that, but I do have to mention it. And this is Chidemonium globsum, and that is the main form of mold here. This client looks completely great with that. And then we do one larger one, which is multiple mold species of citrinin that a client could be exposed to. And this client, although there's a little there within normal range, we would expect to see that. We would expect to see at least some based on the high levels of mold they're getting from some of the foods that they may have been eating. So now when we go on this lab, and that's why I'm going to link it up for you. I know not everybody will want to read this, but we have a lot of health practitioners that also listen to the show. So I'm happy to link up this lab and share with you all the different issues that can come along with mold, such as if you've had mold for a long time in your system, leading to issues later in life like neurological issues and brain-based issues. But I don't like to put negative thoughts in people's mind because, again, all of these things can be rebalanced. I had massive mold exposure when I was younger, for sure, and for sure it led to all sorts of sinus issues as well. It takes a little while to get rid of mold. But certainly you can do it within 3 to 6 months. I'm going to teach you how in a moment, but I just wanted to show you, if you're watching along with video, that you can see all of these different items and how you can find it. That's, this one right here, the Aniatin B, which this person was exposed to. The main cause of exposure is from water damaged buildings, although this strain of fungus is one of the most common excuse me, one of the most common cereal contaminants. Grains in many different countries have been contaminated with this particular mold. So all of this will be available for you to check out. But we want to make sure that we also share with you that just because you do have high mold doesn't mean that you can't recover. The first thing we want to do, and this is really important, the way that you get over mold is not just doing a mold protocol. That's important to do, okay? That's important to do. However, you need to get rid of the exposure first. And that's because you'll be on a mold protocol for the rest of your life if you don't get rid of the exposure. So I have many podcasts on mold. I'm definitely going to link them up today at stevencabral.com/2218. But what I want to do is share with you is this. You have to look for the mold exposure in your home. You can literally get a company to come out to you for free. They're called mold remediators. And that is because if they find mold in your home, you'll most likely be able to use your homeowner's insurance to pay them to then remediate it. So of course, they come out, they want to show you a positive result if it's really there, and then they'll get paid to remediate it, right? They'll get remediated, just means to remove it from your house. And the other caution I would say is if you ever have any water damage in your home, it's a pain, it costs money, but you want to get rid of everything that was exposed to water damage. You really do. So if you had water run down one of your walls, I had to do that in an apartment that I was living in Boston, our condo. We had to rip out the entire wall, and we had to rip out the insulation on that wall. A neighbor above us, unfortunately, their sink overflowed, it leaked, it ran down our wall. We had to replace all of the sheetrock. We had to replace the insulation, but better to do that honestly, than have mold start to grow over the next few months and years. So remove the exposure, and that includes then your cereal grains as well. That's literally boxed cereal, boxed beans, dried almonds, like anything like that that could be exposed, nuts, and just make sure that you're getting mold-free varieties, right? So if you're getting oats, there are companies that test for mold, and they can just make sure that, okay, they're mold-free. And I think that that's very important to do. So those are the main things. What can you do if you're outside in New England, in March? Well, it can be a bit of a challenge in April, right? Because there's mold in the air. So at that point, though, you simply want to be on a mold protocol, or if you're healthy, then your body's going to be able to fight off the mold that it's exposed to, again, as long as it is healthy and as long as the exposure is not too great. So once we've removed the way that you're getting it, then we actually want to then complete, most likely first, like again, that's why you need to test your gut first. You can't do a mold protocol if you have gut-based issues. And the reason is you would do the gut protocol first. So you'd most likely do the citracidal plus CBO protocol first. You do an intestinal cleanse, which includes the binders, such as your bentonite clay, etc. And then after that, you would complete the mold protocol while you're doing the heal and seal to seal up your gut. That's without a doubt the most effective way to do it. That's what we found in our practice to far and away be the most effective, because you're getting 12 weeks of the CBO protocol, you're doing an intestinal cleanse with the binders, then you're healing and sealing your gut while doing the mold-based protocol. And that's shorter as well. But if you look at it, well, it's 12 weeks, which also helps with mold. And then you add on the 8-week or so mold-based protocol. For sure, that's what we've seen the greatest results in our practice with pretty amazing before and after success stories. So hopefully this was helpful. Again, if you like these case studies, just let me know. I'm happy to do more of them. You can always leave a comment right here on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, I would love you to do that. I would love you to follow, subscribe, and click that notification bell for daily health-based videos. And of course, if you want to leave a comment on Instagram, you're also welcome too. So the case study PDF and the lab, if you want to run your own mycotoxins lab, as well as that Candida metabolic and vitamins test, you can head on over to stephencabral.com/2218. Take care, everyone.